All right, here we are going to learn how to find several important features of a quadratic equation by hand. Because remember that you are expected to be able to find most things both in your calculator and algebraically. Remember that there will be separate parts on your assessments, one where you're not allowed to use the graphing calculator and one where you are. So very important that even if you can find it on the calculator, that you can also find it without. So here's our example. We're going to find the intercepts and vertex of this quadratic function by hand. We're going to show all of our work. So the bullet points kind of give you the hints as to what you're going to do. So x-intercepts are the ones that are the most work because that really is the same as solving the quadratic. So what we do is we set the function equal to 0 and solve for x. So set the function equal to 0 means we put 0 in place of f of x. So we're going to have 4x squared plus 14x minus 8 equals 0. So it says usually by factoring. Remember that we learned 5 different ways to solve quadratics, and because this says by hand, that would eliminate solving by graphing. But the other methods would be up for grabs, but typically factoring is the one that works. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to factor this. When we factor, remember, we go through kind of that order of operations. First thing I do is look for and take out any common factors. So these 3 terms are all even numbers, which means they're definitely divisible by 2. 8 and 4 are both divisible by 4, but 14 is not. So 2 is going to be our common factor. We're going to take that out in front. And then we're going to look to factor what we have left. So because this has a number in front of it, and I know it's not a special product because this is a minus and because 2 isn't a perfect square. I know it's not chart factorable because of the 2. So this is going to be the either guess and check method or slide divide bottoms up method. You get to choose, but as I've said before, I typically will choose guess and check just because I believe that it's faster. So when I'm guessing and checking, that means I'm taking the factors of 2 and putting them in the front. And then I'm taking the factors of 4, so that could either be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2, but we need to switch out those negative signs. So I know for sure it's going to be a 2x and an x. So that I'm really confident about. What I put in the back might vary a little bit, but remember one of the hints that you were taught. When you are solving by guessing and checking, you cannot put anything in this parenthesis that is going to create a GCF, which means because this is 2 and 2, I can't put a 2 here. So that completely eliminates this choice. And in the other choice, I can't put a 4 here because 2 and 4 are both divisible by 4. So even though this says guess and check, you really don't have to guess if you remember those rules. So I know this has to be a 1 and this has to be a 4. So now I just have to see which one's going to be the plus and which one's going to be the minus. I want this to be a positive 7x, so that tells me I'm going to put the plus here and the minus here, because when I do the O and the I of my FOIL, this guy gives me plus 8 and this gives me minus 1, which does give me a total of plus 7. So I factored it. I checked it to make sure that the factoring was correct. So now that means that I can solve once it's factored. So set each factor equal to 0 and get x alone. So here add 1 and then divide by 2. So x equals 1/2. And then over here I'd subtract the 4. So x equals -4. So these are the solutions. Remember that solutions are not the exact same as the x-intercepts. X-intercepts are, the solutions are the x-coordinates. So don't forget to write these as ordered pairs. If x equals 1/2, that means 1/2 0 is an x-intercept. If x equals -4, that means -4 0 is an x-intercept. So I have found my x-intercepts. Check right there. Second bullet point, the y-intercept. When I have a standard form quadratic, you can use a shortcut because it's just going to be whatever the constant is. So in this case, my constant's -8. I really don't have to do any work. I know that 0, -8 should be my y-intercept. Now, if it's not in standard form, you can also anytime find a y-intercept by plugging in 0 for x. Notice that in this case, if you'd forgotten the trick and did that, plugged 0 in for your x, you would still get -8 because 0 squared is 0, 4 times 0 is 0, 14 times 0 still 0. So you'd have 0 minus 8, which does give you -8. Okay, so we've got the x-intercepts, we've got the y-intercepts. Now we're going to find the vertex. So we found both the intercepts, check. Now we're going to find the vertex. So the x-coordinate of the vertex can be found by averaging the x-intercepts. Now, in a previous video, you were taught another way to algebraically find the vertex. So this is just giving you another option here. So my vertex here, averaging means to add them together and divide by how many there are. So the vertex, the x is going to be 1/2 plus -4, and then I'm going to divide that by 2. So 1/2 plus -4 gives me -3.5, which -3.5, or if you wanted to do this by finding a common denominator, -4 is -8/2, so plus 1/2 gives me -7/2, and then divided by 2. Again, dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2, so that gives us an x-coordinate of -7/4. So we find the y by plugging in the x. So that means this is the x-coordinate of my vertex. If I want to know the y, I have to plug in -7/4 to my equation. So 4 times -7/4 squared plus 14 times -7/4 minus 8. So, order of operations says I square this first. A negative times a negative I know is a positive. 7 times 7 is 49. 4 times 4 is 16. Then over here, when this is 14/1, so I can cross reduce. These are both divisible by 2. So that's going to give me plus -49/2, and then I've got minus 8. When I go to multiply the 4 times the 49/16, these are both divisible by 4. So that gives me 49/4 minus 49/2. 49/2 is twice as big as 49/4, so that means that's going to give me -49/4 minus 8, which -49/4 minus, if I write 8 with a fourths in the denominator, it'd be -32/4. So that gives me -81/4 as my y coordinate. So -7/4, -81/4 would be my vertex. And notice how I did all of that by hand. So now you know how to find x-intercepts by hand, y-intercept by hand, and a vertex by hand.